All right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. I'm very excited to have Mike Holcomb here on the show today. Mike is the global lead for ICS and OT Cybersecurity at Fluor, an engineering and construction solutions provider based in Texas. He's a really big advocate for the protection of OT networks, and on his social media platforms, for example, he's really generous about sharing his knowledge on how to get into this business, how to succeed. This is a very unique discipline as far as cybersecurity goes. And if you're not following Mike on social media, you should. You'll definitely learn something. So I imagine we'll get into a lot of that in the next 30 minutes or so with Mike. Before we start, though, just my usual pitch to subscribe and share the podcast. It's really the best way to keep up with the guests I've got coming up. For example, I'll be at RSA conference in a month or so, recording some episodes with a bunch of folks that I have lined up. So if you subscribe, you definitely won't miss those. So stay tuned. And thanks as always for the support. Really helps the show. So let's start off today's episode and bring in Mike. How you doing, sir? Good to meet you.
I'm good. Yeah, you too, Michael. Thanks again for having me along for the podcast.
Did I get it right? Is it Fluor, the pronunciation and what you guys do?
It is, yes. Yeah, it's Fluor. I didn't know actually what we did when I went to work there. And it just turned out to be one of the world's largest engineering and we oversee construction for some of the world's largest projects that are out there.
Is that where you started in OT cyber? What's your career path?
Yeah, I've been in IT cyber for 30 plus years. I was always drawn to computers. I grew up with my best friend who was a kind of a traditional hacker kiddie, so I just always had security in mind. So I always wanted to do cyber security, keep computers secure. And when Stuxnet hit in 2010, for those that aren't familiar, Stuxnet is the first known case of a state adversary, in this case, the Americans and Israelis teaming up to create this technological marvel, which is still considered a marvel today, which it was the first known piece of malware designed to target control systems. And in this case, it was the control systems that were responsible for controlling the centrifuges in Iran that would be used to enrich uranium gas to ultimately be used to make nuclear weapons. And so when news of Stuxnet came out, I was just really fascinated with that idea.
Yeah.
And then started just ask questions like, well, how does this work? Like in I think critical infrastructure, so in a water treatment facility or a power plant, and do power plants have computers? I'm like, I'm sure they do, but I had no clue. I'm like, how does this work? So that's where I started asking those questions, and then it wasn't. It was only probably less than 2 years after that when I got my job at Fluor. And so it was kind of met from, I guess you could say, and it all kind of started there. And I just finally realized after getting into the role on the IT cyber side that we're a really large or giant engineering company, and we probably have some of these OT or these control system things laying around, and I work with some of the best control system and electrical and chemical and other types of engineers in the world. And so I'm able to work with them and talk with them, and we've started to build the control system cybersecurity practice years ago, and help our customers ensure that not only do we build these large environments but that they're also secure from a cyber perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's a big pivot, though, especially back then, going from IT to OT, though.
It was for sure, and we see a lot of people making that pivot to today. I think you typically see two types of people coming in. You see those like myself that have an IT cybersecurity background, which you're going to need. You can't come directly from IT. You really need to, if you're coming from the IT world, you really need to nail the cybersecurity fundamentals at a minimum before you want to make a shift into OT. And then you also have folks like engineers and other people already in OT doing automation, PLC technicians, or the folks that are running plants, that some get that kind of that bug to also, learn about cybersecurity and how it applies into control system environments. And so it's kind of, we used to always have, as long as I've been in it since 2010, 2011, you would see kind of a makeup of 50% kind of the IT cyber folks and 50% of the OT, the engineer folks that were learning about OT cyber, which was really cool. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
now weighted a little bit more heavily to IT cyber folks, just because there's more IT cyber folks out there. And there's a lot more awareness, growing around the OT space and why it's important that,
Right.
yeah, we protect our power plants, which generate electricity, and we protect our water treatment facilities, which provide clean water, and we protect our factories and farms that put food on our table. It's all of these, you know, services that, we rely on in our daily lives.
Yeah, that's always kind of the talking point when someone asks you, what you do. It's like with cybersecurity, they're thinking, you're patching servers or desktops, and what OT folks is, it's all about the physical world and protecting uh, you know line operators or the public or patients in a hospital. It's a much different equation when it comes to safety, which is like paramount versus confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Very much so. Yeah, it's definitely a huge mind shift, when you do go,
Hmm.
like you said, in the IT world where we're using applications and processing, terabytes, spreadsheets, and databases. We just have data everywhere, and we always, preach confidentiality and making sure the attackers can't steal the information and access it. Where, yeah, the number one priority in the OT world is safety. We want to make
Hmm.
sure that everybody stays safe. Everybody goes home at the end of the day. Everybody goes home with all their fingers and toes, and also worry about the environment. If I had an explosion in a petrochemical facility at a plant, what's the impact to the area around that facility? Let alone, what if
Yep.
there's families and just the general public that live in that area, right? It could be potentially catastrophic. So yeah,
Right.
we're looking at safety is the number one priority in OT, and then sure, yeah, we're definitely also want to make sure that plant, that environment, whatever it's doing is stays up and running, right? We want the power
Hmm.
plant running 24/7. We want the insulin manufacturing plant running 24/7. We want the clean, the water treatment facility running 24/7. So yeah, it's all about safety and availability. So it's definitely a mind shift in IT. But I would say that, a lot of people, more often not, they want to focus on the differences. And I hate it when, especially a lot of OT folks, traditional OT folks say, well, OT security is nothing like OT security, which is completely false. And I don't know if they're just
Right.
gaslighting. I think they're all well intentioned. At the end of the day, IT cyber and OT cyber have a lot more in common than they don't. What's critical for people to understand, especially coming from an IT background, is where IT and OT cyber are different and how they're different. Because things like vulnerability management are very different between those two worlds, and you
Hmm.
can't go into just a power plant and say, "Hey, I'm going to upgrade all of your OT systems like programmable logic controllers or PLCs," and then just reboot them because you will bring down the plant and you could cause a safety issue. You could cause an
Right.
explosion and you could hurt or kill people. It's so
Yeah.
it's understanding very similar, and we both sides would say, the both sides of the house have a lot to be able to share with each other. But we have to remember, yeah, there are differences and where those differences are. But also remember, we're all part of the same team. We all live in the same house. We're trying to protect the same house. And so we definitely need to work together to do that.
So, as I mentioned at the outset, I've been kind of following your LinkedIn posts, for example, for a while, and you really share a lot of valuable information in there. Like you're getting started in OT cybersecurity series. It's on YouTube. it's free and it's out there. What was kind of your inspiration to put it down on paper, so to speak, and kind of formalize it and make it available? It seems like a real passion for you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you checking out the post and the YouTube videos and yeah, it's for me it really just got to the point. I just remember when it kind of goes back to, when I started asking those questions, how does this work in a power plant? And I couldn't find people to have those conversations. And this is before, SANS had their training and others out there as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I started to realize when was starting to talk with, folks like doing operations and maintenance work in these facilities. It's not that they didn't necessarily want to have the conversation. They just weren't doing anything for cybersecurity. And so that was really the problem. And so we've come a long way just in the last, 10, 15 years, especially the last 5 years. But for me, I just remember how frustrated I was. And, to the point where I'm like, I'm just giving up. But then it's like, no, I
Yeah.
really, want to know how this works. And so as I was very fortunate, I work for a great company that invests in its employees, and I've been very fortunate to go to SANS training. I also realize that not everybody has, these days $10,000 or $11,000 to take a course. Right? That's a lot of money. Um, and there's some other training out there, but it just seemed like, to cover the basics. I wrote the kind of the getting started in ICS OT cybersecurity course as a way of, this is the class I wish I had before I even went to take the SANS course. So it's not even meant to replace SANS courses. It's a, hey, if you're considering going down this road, take this course, and then you're either
Mm-hmm.
better prepared to go take something like SANS, and it makes your $11,000 that much more effective, or maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum and you just realize, hey, this isn't for me. That's okay too, right? Because I'm sure there's some people that, yeah, they're just interested in it. They want to learn about it, and then they're like, yeah, it's interesting maybe, but not for me. And I
Yeah.
said that, and and everybody in between. Right? I get to talk with folks all over the spectrum. So that's kind of one of the great things of doing LinkedIn and YouTube.
And I mean, with so many IT people coming over to OT or being responsible for OT cybersecurity, a series like yours really covers a lot of the fundamentals, and it just might help them, be a little less overwhelmed at the start anyway, if nothing else.
For sure. And I get a lot of feedback. I mean, it's almost, I say almost on a daily basis, which is really awesome. Where people, yeah, especially when someone says, "Hey, I'm just getting into OT, and you helped me get my first job." Like one of my old students at Greenville Tech, and he was an engineer by trade, but now he's a security analyst in a nuclear power plant.
Hmm.
It's things like that is really cool. Or there was a um, Ukrainian refugee that had taken the course, works in OT now, and it was said that it was because of the course. Things like that. It just, yeah, it makes it all worth it.
I was just going to say that's amazing validation.
Yeah, exactly. Even for one person, it made all the work worth it. And yeah, for those people, coming from IT, there are a lot of people today that, they might work in IT and an environment that maybe they have a manufacturing plant, and now all of a sudden that person in IT, it's like, okay, you're responsible for OT. They're like,
Right.
okay, and they probably, like I did 15 years ago, think, oh yeah, it's just the same as IT. But again, we have to
Hmm.
learn those differences and how they're different. So yeah, we see a lot of people kind of in that situation today, and it's almost, at least from the people I talk with, it's like it's ramping up. It's more and more, IT people having OT basically forced on them. So I do get a lot of great
Yeah.
feedback from folks that say, hey, this is awesome. Now at least know kind of where I'm headed, what I'm doing, at least at a high level. Right. And
Right.
it's also funny. Sometimes I have I have people that reach out says, "Oh, this class is awesome. Now I know now I know how to do my job." And then I look on LinkedIn and I should laugh, but they've been doing like OT, like maybe as a consultant for like the last 7 or 8 years. That's
Yeah.
so I was like, "Oh, well, okay." And maybe some of the big name providers out there. So it's helped a lot of people. It's really exciting, to get that feedback, especially anytime I can help somebody get a job. That's a
Yeah.
big part of why I do. Definitely believe in the mission, right? Keeping critical infrastructure up and running, make sure we have the services we rely on in our daily lives, of course. But on top of that, it's if I can help somebody get a job, especially someone that's got a family to take care of. That's everything for me.
Yeah. The example you gave of, I believe you said it was a student of yours who was an engineer and is now doing OT cyber. How typical is that where engineers are starting to align with cyber and have those responsibilities?
It does happen. I would say it's less. Said back in probably 10 years ago, it was kind of 50 for folks. So you had people from OT and from IT learning about how to secure OT together, which made for some really interesting conversations for sure. I remember going
Hmm.
to my first SANS course, and there was a gentleman on the other side. He was an engineer in a water treatment facility, and he asked a really basic networking question. I was like, "Oh, I know the answer to that. So I know everything about OT cyber," but it was the way he asked the question. It really demonstrated, people in OT and engineering think very differently
Yeah.
than us, from an IT background. So it's, really it highlighted, and nothing you necessarily learn in that course other than I need to learn to think like an engineer if I'm going to
Right.
be successful in this field. And that's usually what I tell people coming from IT. That's the number one way to get started is you have to learn to think like engineers. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's I would say, at Fluor we have 4,000 control systems and electrical engineers. Um, and I would say there's a couple of dozen that are really passionate about control system cybersecurity, but that's 4,000 engineers. And it's nothing against any of our team members. And we're not unique to any other environment as well.
Yeah.
It's like anything, right? It's just like in IT, right? Not everybody in IT cares about cybersecurity, right? Where I've always
Hmm.
been, how dare you, right? How can you not? It's
Right.
but you have to understand, yeah, it's just no, it's not for everybody. And so yeah, it's the same way for whether engineers or other automation team members or PLC techs. And it's some, right, they really, I mean, they obviously believe in the mission of safety and availability for critical services for sure, but they
Hmm.
might not see cybersecurity as their responsibility or something that they're interested in. Whereas I
Yeah.
know, at Fluor, we've had more than a few engineers go get their master's degrees in cybersecurity. And then we pull them
Hmm.
over into the IT cybersecurity team and also get them hands-on experience there. So, doing vulnerability management, doing, working in the SOC, watching for malicious activity, responding to, oh, someone's got, a malicious file on a USB drive, right? Getting them that experience that also plays well in the OT cybersecurity side.
Right. Do you notice the IT security or networking folks that are now being tasked with protecting OT? Are they coming to those roles and those responsibilities with any misconceptions or misperceptions that need to be cleaned up in a hurry? I mean, like I'm thinking like air gaps. You guys air gap everything. What's the
Right.
problem? Or not focusing on safety first, things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and I I sympathize because, and I try not to judge. There's
Yeah.
a lot of, or I should say, there's a few kind of judgy people in the OT community that kind of will keep people at bay, unfortunately, but we try to ignore them and welcome everybody else. But yeah, I just think of myself when I went to step foot on my first actual like real life project. It was one of the Western Hemisphere's largest, you can say, like traditional power plants, and so it's powered by natural gas and steam and water, right? And huge plant. And I just remember, walking in there and be like, yeah, you can. It's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Just, oh yeah, you can just patch these systems and reboot them, and everything will be secure. It's like that's not it's not how it works, because yeah, you're going to
Right.
get somebody hurt, you're going to get somebody killed, you're going to bring the plant down at the very minimum. And so I think that's still very, very typical for IT people today. So I really, one of the things I try to focus on in my training again is don't listen to the OT folks that want to tell you that OT and IT have nothing in common, because again, vastly, right, the majority are, they have in common, right? It's all similar. We just have to be aware, if you are coming from IT, here's where they're different. Like mentioned, vulnerability management. You can't just patch everything like in IT, right? IT Patch Tuesday comes out, we run around, we just get everything patched like in a week or two, and we're good
Yep.
usually, right? In OT, you have a patch. You have to sit down, you have to work with the engineers and the folks that run the plant to understand, do we even need to patch this asset? We might not even need to. So in OT, we take this now, never, next approach. And so it's, hey, is this something that could affect safety or availability, and we have to take action? Then let's do it, and let's do it now. That's very, very, very rare. More often in the OT world, we see, yeah, this vulnerability is so buried into the environment, or there's very little that an attacker could do with it, or we have all these compensating
Mhm.
controls to reduce risk. Then, okay, we're not going to address it now, but maybe we never will, or maybe we'll address it in the next maintenance window. That next maintenance window, it could be 6, 12 months down the road. I think that's one thing that IT folks don't realize when they're first coming into OT. But it makes sense. If I have a power plant, do I really want to take the power plant down on the weekends for maintenance? No, of course not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you kind of anticipated a future question I had for you, but just I'm curious, like what are some success stories you've heard around OT vulnerability management? Obviously, as you've said, it's a very different practice than IT patching, for example. And how good are companies doing risk assessments around OT, et cetera? How well versed are they?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. OT today
Yeah.
reminds me of how IT was 15, 20 years ago. And thankfully, it took a long time for IT to come up to speed on cyber. I've been around not as long as some folks, but definitely more than others in the IT world at 30 plus years. So I remember screaming into the void back in the day that, the hackers are coming and we have to protect our IT networks. And we still have some of that in OT today, but we had the Colonial Pipeline breach back in May of 2021. That really changed the landscape for OT
Yeah.
cybersecurity. It's kind of like for me, like the Target breach in IT was that one incident that happened where a lot of businesses all of a sudden were like, "Ooh, we better do something about this cyber thing." Even the army, I had a friend that basically formed the security program for the army with a few other folks. The army was like, we probably should do something about this cyber thing. And it's Colonial Pipeline, a couple of years ago in 2021, was like that for OT, because up until then, pretty much the only major incidents you had in OT environments were the product, like with Stuxnet, it was a state adversary, an advanced persistent threat coming into your environment, right, using all these unlimited resources they had at their disposal to come after you. And so a lot of OT environments, they're like, well, no one's coming after us, right? It's no military or government in the world wants anything to do with us, so we don't have to worry about anything cyber. But with Colonial Pipeline, it wasn't a state adversary; it was a ransomware group. And they were just sending
Right.
emails to every email address in the world, trying to get somebody to click on a link or open up an attachment and infect their system. And in Colonial's case, that entire IT network, of course, became compromised, burned to the ground, and then that started to spread into the OT network. And I think one thing a lot of people don't realize from coming from IT is that in OT you have a lot of Windows machines. You have Active Directory, you have
Yep.
file servers, you have workstations, and so if you have a pretty much unrestricted or unsecure connection between IT and OT, because there is some data transfer between those two networks now, and there's secure ways to do that, and there's unsecure ways to do that. And in Colonial Pipeline's case, it wasn't secure, as indicated by the incident. And so the ransomware starts moving into OT, so they had to shut everything down in OT. And it just happened to that OT network ran the largest gasoline pipeline in the United States. And so we had,
Hmm.
gas issues up and down the East Coast for a week and a half, almost 2 weeks. And it was that first real world impact that people saw and experienced, that another one where you realize, oh, we probably should do something about this.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Unfortunately, we're still reactive, and it takes an incident like that to
it
get something
is.
like OT cybersecurity to be mainstream.
Yeah, unfortunately, and we still even see it today, where there are still some people that they're waiting for, some type of OT cyber incident to kill, 100 plus people before they're going to do something about it, which, or maybe,
Mhm.
take down, some, maybe a large section of food and agriculture, right? If we can't feed a significant populate percentage of our population, right? That's when we're going to take action. It's like, why don't we want to be
Yeah.
proactive? I'm confused. So yeah, but that's we get
Mhm.
that a lot, unfortunately.
Do you see or do you hear questions from defenders of OT networks about which threats should really matter to them? Because I mean, some of this stuff seems kind of theoretical or just in the realm of a really advanced attacker. And there are so many proprietary protocols and legacy stuff in these environments that it seems really hard to attack them anyway. I mean, what kind of things are you hearing about threats and which threats should matter?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of it's one of those big misconceptions for folks on both sides of, between IT and OT, that it's hard to get into the OT network, right? Once you're in the OT network, it's hard to have an impact, and that's true as far as and let me take a step back, so I probably better explain, but it's I would say in a lot of environments, it is almost trivial to move from the IT network into the OT network for many reasons. But usually it's, there's a unsecured connection between the two. Um, in a perfect world, we would only allow OT to send data to IT, right? So if let's say I have a manufacturing plant, like Fluor had designed and built the world's largest insulin manufacturing plant. So as you're manufacturing all those insulin injections, you have to send that data to the IT side, to the back office, so they understand things like, well, how many insulin injections did we manufacture today, so they could do things like coordinate storage and shipping and logistics. So in a
Hmm.
perfect world, you can have OT only send data, kind of like a read-only fashion, right, to IT. So IT gets what it needs for the business to function, but you're not exposing OT to IT, because the number one way for attackers to get into OT is from IT, just like we were talking about with the Colonial Pipeline incident, right? The attackers got into IT with the ransomware. Eventually, it starts to spread to OT. It would be the idea, and so yeah, there's it's a lot of people think that oh, only state adversaries can do this. But remember, that was one of the, I guess we can say, the bad things about Colonial Pipeline. Yes, did it raise the awareness for us as defenders that, hey, we need to do something about OT cybersecurity? Absolutely. But it also showed every ransomware group operator and every hacktivist and every other type of attacker out there in the world that wasn't aware of OT that, oh, there is this thing called OT, and you can actually have a big impact if you go after these environments. And you can make money by going after these environments. And yeah, a lot of these environments are not secure. And so it was one of those where, and that's why we've seen year after year since Colonial Pipeline, we've seen the number of attacks and the number of attackers, I mean, doubling, tripling since then. So we've really
Hmm.
been kind of fighting this awareness game to help people understand, whether they're in OT, whether they're from IT, that the attacks are increasing. The attackers are increasing. The impacts are increasing. And where we're at today, that we see, you talk about the state actors, right? Which you don't see them pop up very often, right? It's very low frequency. But when they do,
Right.
really bad things happen. So there's high impact. Hacktivists on the other end, right? You see them all the time, especially these days with Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East. So you see a lot of hacktivist activity. So it's very high frequency, but the impact is sometimes it's very trivial, almost a joke.
Right.
But now
Right.
we see, and we kind of suspected for years there's a connection, and we're seeing that connection become stronger and stronger. So now, as you see the tactics, techniques, right, the tools, right, the mindset, the knowledge transferring from state adversaries to hacktivists, now we have, down the road, right, the idea would be we're going to be seeing high frequency, high impact because of this connection. Call it the world's worst, OT love story, because now we have the state actors and the hacktivists that have come together to attack these environments.
Are critical infrastructure companies thinking along these lines? Are they threat modeling accordingly, or are they in for a rude awakening, so to speak?
Yeah, some are and some aren't, and everything in between. Of course, in my day job, I get to work with some of, not only the largest critical infrastructure providers, but those with the strongest control system security programs out there. The Shells and the Saudi Aramcos of the world, second to none. Right? They understand the issue. They've you know thrown massive resources at addressing the issue. The problem is when we talk about critical infrastructure, those services we rely on in our daily lives, a lot of what we rely on, even think water treatment, that comes from not like a massive company like Shell or Saudi Aramco. It comes from more than likely almost a small to medium sized business. And a lot of the small, medium sized businesses, they just don't have the resources to dedicate
Right.
to OT. So first, you have to get over that awareness hurdle to help them understand, yeah, you need to do something about OT. And they said, okay, well, now I know I need to do something about OT, but I don't have anybody for OT cyber. I don't even have anybody for OT. I don't even have anybody for IT cyber. What are you expecting me to do? And
Yeah.
that's really the big challenge right now is you have the vast majority of OT shops out there. They're these small and medium sized providers, like mom and pop shops that maybe provide water to a couple thousand people, and yeah, they just don't have the resources
Yeah.
to. And so that's,
Yeah.
yeah,
I would
definitely
even.
one of those.
Yeah. I would even argue that like their awareness is where it should be in most cases. They're asking for help and not getting it, whether it's from the government or, just kind of from a resource point of view, as you said, they don't have skilled people, they don't have money to throw tooling at it, and they're asking for help. They need help, especially like small water utilities, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, water's definitely a big one. You can, yeah, have these little small mom and pop shops, and yeah, awareness has come a long way since Colonial Pipeline. Most definitely. I would still say it's still not, 100% where it needs to be, but I mean, it's probably 80%, let's say, where it needs to be. So yeah, like you said, a lot of OT environments out there know now that they need to do something about it, but they have zero resources to do anything about it. And
Yeah.
that was partly when I built the Getting Started course. It's not just about, hey, how do I get into to to ICS or OT, but it's, hey, if I'm building a program, where where do I start? And
Hmm.
Sands and the instructors there, especially, going back with Mike Asante, who had originated the program, Rob Lee, Tim Conway, and the others, they do a really great job of focusing on, here's the practical ways to defend OT networks. And the nice thing is, it's very beneficial, is those things that reduce your risk the most often cost the least. So that's
Yeah.
that's a win-win. So when you talk about, yeah, if you need to protect IT, OT, and they're connected and they're talking to each other, and you don't have a firewall, let's at least start there and get you a firewall. And then we can determine what traffic can go from IT to OT and vice versa. Right? It's, oh, let's
Hmm.
make sure all of your OT assets are backed up, and that you test, those backups, and that you can restore them when you need to, and where your spare parts are. Yeah, I have, a
Right.
couple, clients I work with on the side, and environments from a couple million to 500 million, and it's, it doesn't matter the size. It's, do you have a replacement part for this? And they're like, we think so. It's like, oh yeah, it says we have one. It's like, okay, well,
Maybe.
where is it? Yeah. And I had, one. They're like, oh well, if we lose the part, our provider will get us one within like 8 hours. So it's like, that just sounds like you're taking a chance that
Yeah.
they would have one. Or what if there's a run on this all of a sudden, and then there's a
Hmm.
shortage? Then what are you gonna do? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, we awareness has come a long way, but I do think a lot about the haves and the have-nots in OT cyber. Because, like I said, I get to see, and get I learn a lot, and it's great to be able to work with the Shells and the Ramcos and these other large providers, undoubtedly in my day job. But also, talking with others, and working, with others, outside that, there's,
Yeah.
it's a struggle, most definitely, and I
Right.
feel for them.
All right, Mike. So we're coming up against time, and I just wanted to ask you one last question. Just kind of, what's your either go-to kind of resource for OT cybersecurity material, or what's like your best piece of advice for somebody starting out, whether they're coming from the IT side or just out of school and want to get into it? What's your best piece of advice for somebody around security and OT?
Yeah, I would say if you're coming from an IT cyber background, honestly, I put everything into the course and the ebook that goes with it. It really walks you through, here's OT cyber from a kind of, basic fundamental, but also you have a very practical perspective to the course, which I think connects with a lot of people. So again, if you're coming from IT cyber and you want to learn, I know I'm biased, but again, I do get a lot of good feedback about the class. And if you're coming from OT, I think it helps as well. There's also a lot of other great resources out there, and that's why I was amazed at LinkedIn when I started to really actually first post a little over a year and a half ago, and connecting with, you can just learn from so much from the people in the field. You have folks out there like, Rob Lee, Bryson Bohr, Emma Stewart, Patrick Miller, and I can go just the list goes on and on and on, that not only do they post on LinkedIn, but they're in the comments, they're sharing, right? They're welcoming people into the community. Um, Again, I could just I just see like faces and names popping up. They're just really incredible people that you can learn. And even just when I teach my class live, which I do every like 4 or 5 months, I get a couple hundred people, and it's just not only people from IT, but people in all these different OT environments, and you get to learn from everybody's stories, whether it's in a class or in the comments on LinkedIn. So you learn so much just from the comments on different posts. So it's really amazing how incredible of a resource it is for OT cyber, and obviously other fields as well. But there is a really incredible OT cybersecurity community out there. So if you're interested in learning more about OT, I always suggest people, the best suggestion is embrace the community, and LinkedIn, as far as I know, is the best place to do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I went to S4 last month. It was my first time at that show, and
Oh, were you there?
it
Oh, very
was
cool.
it was great to put
Yeah.
a lot of faces with some of the people that I'd done podcasts with or just kind of heard of, and but just a lot of the information sharing was really cool to see as well. That was really special.
It is. It is. S4 is an incredible show. We always say the RSA
Yeah,
of the OT
yeah,
world,
yeah,
and so it's great for everybody to get together. But it's another one of those that it's like $2,400 to get in,
yeah. Yep.
and that's not something everybody has.
Right.
So yeah, there's
Yeah, you
only
can't send a whole team there for sure.
no. That's why actually we had B-Sides ICS the Monday before,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll be there in Miami next year, the day before. So we're a $30 ticket, and we had
Much more reasonable.
not only some of the big names from S4, but we also had about probably 75, 80 folks that were there, that were brand new to OT, and we just
Mm-hmm.
kind of mix everybody up in the same place, and we're just all hanging out for the day and sharing and learning, and yeah, it was a really great experience.
All right, good stuff, Mike. I want to thank you so much. It's great meeting you, and I really appreciate the time and the good information. This was fun.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks,
All right.
Michael. Yeah, anytime.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, reach out. So, all right, have a
You
good one.
too.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks.
again.